Hi everyone, welcome to the Jobskin webinar series on achieving compression in the body's dips. With us today is Rosemary Kendall, our clinical advisor in WA, as well as Veronica Eichmann, a clinical advisor in New Zealand. My name is Adam Ho, I'm the Managing Director, and with that I will hand over to Rosemary.
Okay, thanks for joining us. We had lots of people here with us yesterday, so it looks like this is a topic that obviously people find challenging. So let me give a brief overview about today. We're going to have a pretty practical focus today. I'm looking at basically some problem solving in specific areas, but we're going to start by looking or thinking about where compression is actually applied in compression garments. Then I'm going to define what we're talking about as the dips. Then we're going to try and put those two pieces of information together and to see how those two relate, and then we'll look at some specific applications for that. So if we start with this is kind of like basic 101 theory of compression. If you imagine that you had, say, a piece of plumbing pipe and you slid a compression stocking over it, you would be getting equal compression all the way round because it's a cylinder. And those of you who've kind of read a bit about compression will have heard of the law of Laplace, which is used in calculating the pressure of compression garments, and it also helps us understand how compression is graduated. However, we can't just take that very complex law of physics and just plop it into compression world, because bodies are not cylinders. Bodies are more like ovals. A lot of the body is more oval shaped. Torso, obviously, forearms, maybe the calf or possibly the upper arm, although the upper arm is still fairly oval. Possibly the calf is sort of more circular, but most of the body has got a more oval shape. So does compression work the same on an oval as it does for a circle? No, it doesn't. So we have greater compression on the pointy bits of the oval, and we have less compression on the flatter bits of the oval. So when we think about that for the body, that means, say, for example, even just a pair of waist-high garments, you're going to get far more compression on the hips than you are on the tummy and potentially the bottom as well. So let's think about the dips. Really, the dips, what we're calling the dips, are any concave areas in the body. So classic ones that present challenges are the palm of the hand, behind the lateral malleolus, and this comes up time and again because it's often a pocket for edema or lymphedema, and there is a surprisingly high number of people who have scarring or burn scarring behind the lateral malleolus, and so we need to get compression there. Between the breasts, certainly. The supraclavicular notches, sort of just, you can feel that in yourself, the dip behind and above your clavicles. Inferior to the ears and behind the mandible, when we have people with well, certainly scarring, but also edema around here. This is a really tricky area to compress. One that we often don't think about is the gluteal fold, because if you have someone who's got a bigger bottom, and particularly if it's a more muscular bottom, their weight, like a waist-high garment, is likely to sort of tent across the gluteal fold to the back of the thigh. But if that's where you want the compression, that's a problem. Popliteal crease potentially is another one. And then, of course, there's a whole raft of dips that are caused by or are defects that are caused by trauma. And we'll look at that a little bit towards the end. So let's go back and match that kind of compression theory to looking at the dips. Now, I did try very hard to get a shape in PowerPoint that would mimic a cross section of the hand, And if the cross section of the hand would be more rounded around like this, but PowerPoint defeated me. I'm sorry, I tried freeform and everything and it looked terrible. So I've gone with a crescent shape. So imagine this is the palm of the hand, somewhat exaggerated, and this is the dorsum of the hand. And here, let's say the lateral and the medial aspect of the hand, if you just taken this cross section. So because we've got that oval shape, you've got the flatter edge and then you've got the more roundy bits, you're going to get quite high compression on the medial and the lateral borders. And then you're going to get less compression on the dorsum of the hand. Now, a lot of edema and lymphedema, this is a trouble spot. And for say burned hands, people use their hands to cover their face or to protect themselves. So these are often very high target areas for burn scarring. But when you look at that, you just go, oh, well, I'm putting a compression glove on, but I'm not really getting much on the back of the hand relatively. And that is true. And, you know, those who work with edema and lymphedema have known this since day dot, because we know that we don't get enough compression over the dorsum. And so we pad it with chip bags. But I think often what we have failed to understand is, yes, there's not enough compression over the back of the hand to be therapeutic, but actually that's partly because there's a lot of compression on the medial and lateral borders. So what do you get in the palm of the hand? Obviously 0, because the compression garment is going to tent across the palm of the hand. Now, if you need compression in the palm of the hand, which is obviously less common than the dorsum, you have to decide how you're going to go about that, because when we do things in the palm of the hand, we have the potential to impact or impede function. So if we look specifically at the hand, how we intervene obviously depends on where you need the compression. And I spoke about putting in chip bags. That's a really appropriate way to do that, because if we go return to that graphic, so imagine that's a graphic there. If we add the foam, you can see visually that we're kind of working on at least the dorsal half of the hand, you could say. We're looking at trying to restore that to a more circular shape rather than that flattened oval, and so we are increasing the amount of compression. So it actually offloads a bit the pressure on the medial and the lateral borders, and it increases the load, the compression on the dorsum. It doesn't do anything about the palm, and as I started to mention before, you can use foam to pad in the palm, but there is the potential for that to impede function. So you as a therapist has to decide which is the most important, and it might be that, say at night, somebody has compression padding in their palm and during the day they don't. But you know, I'm teaching you to suck eggs. I know you know you know all about that. So what about the ankle? Here's another one. As I mentioned, the malleolus. This is a tricky area because what happens is that the garment tents, and I have to say I've seen a few therapists who have ordered, say, knee-high socks or anklets specifically for behind and below the malleolus, and they put this beautiful fitting garment on, and it gets good compression absolutely everywhere except where you want it, because the garment tents from the peak of the lateral malleolus to the back of the ankle. So now I apologise for the images, they're kind of third hand. I didn't have the original, so I've cut and pasted these off one of our newsletters, which is it's one of our archived newsletters. You can find it on Jobskin.com, where we did actually do an article about this particular topic. So if you wanted to have a look at a couple of other case examples, you can just pop on to Jobskin.com. But when you put the pressure garment on, that's the barefoot, obviously, it just tents across here. It's not a terribly good image, but there is no pressure there. But if you stitch some C-shaped foam or ottoform, or, you know, it's not quite true to say anything, but anything in there that is going to raise the level to the equivalent that the compression garment is sitting at, all of a sudden you're going to get the pressure being transferred down through the foam insert into the onto the tissue underneath. Now, if you do want to do this, it's quite straightforward actually. If you take a measurement from the floor to the center of the lateral malleolus and from the back of the heel to the central malleolus, and you add that to your garment order, then that pinpoints where the lateral malleolus is, and then the factory can stitch that C foam in there for you, C-shaped foam. Now, between the breasts and the décolletage, this is probably more of a scarring issue than edema, lymphedema issue, because if there is edema or lymphedema, it tends to be more generalized and include the breasts. But so the example I'm going to give is actually for scarring, where it's this is used quite specifically. This can be stitched into a vest, so if you are also wanting compression over the breast, you can have a custom-made vest, and then you can have a sternal strap that sits inside it. So this, obviously, you can see exactly where that is aiming to target the pressure between the breasts and the décolletage there, or part of the décolletage. And I've got an image of a patient here, which of course you can't take a screenshot of because we've got consent to show it, but not for you to store it. This young woman had a particularly troublesome keloid scar removed. The surgeon's thrown everything at it from a surgical point of view, and we're throwing everything at it from a scar management point of view, and that has included compression. And this woman has diligently worn this for entire year. She needs to wear it for about another 6 months, and I've actually just reordered, so she's gone all that time with a single sternal strap. And you can see that we put some additional reinforcement along the central area, which is right over the scarring, so that she can get really good compression there. However, that's not the only challenge that we experience between the breasts and the décolletage, and here we do sort of venture back into edema, lymphedema land, because the décolletage itself can be like a wider dip of the body. When if you look down at yourself, you can see that the anterior aspect of your shoulders sits forward from the whole of your décolletage. So there is a little bit of tenting potentially side to side, because the high point that a garment will sit is the anterior of the shoulders. So it's not clinging terribly well to the décolletage. And then if you take into account, in the case of a woman, going from the tip of the breasts up here, you have another kind of curve this way. So sometimes when you want compression on here, you're just not getting enough. Now you can get some from the way the garment is shaped with bra cups, where the side seams are placed so that it kind of minimizes the impact of the shoulders. But this little couple of little tips here, this is probably my best tip ever, because a slight tweak to this, the way this garment constructed, makes a huge difference to the compression over the décolletage. So you do need to have like a little turtleneck. So it doesn't need to be anywhere near as high as is shown on this mannequin. It can just be even just 1 centimetre high, but that forms a basis, almost like a ring or an anchoring ring around the base of the neck. And normally when you put a turtleneck on a vest, this is about where that arrow is, about roughly where it sits. But when it's a little bit high up, I don't know how well you can see me, and if it sits a little bit high up, this kind of adds to that tenting. However, simply by dropping where the turtleneck sits in the garment, we just lower that down and it sits well into the upper chest, so to speak, and then all of a sudden we've completely eliminated that that vertical dip from the breast to the sternal notch. And that's a really good way to solve quite a few fitting issues with vests where you want compression across here, whether it's for edema or for scarring. And then I mentioned at the start about what we could call the man-made dips. These are the ones caused by trauma, or arguably by significant excision of, say, malignancy, where the person is left with a significant, like a bowl or a cup shape in their tissue. And if you put a garment on, you get beautiful compression absolutely everywhere except in the defect. So we have to look at a way of transferring the pressure through. Now, some therapists use Ottoform, which is a absolutely useful, valid, all those things kind of tool. But Ottoform is not designed to be made to cover large areas, really, and Ottoform can be very heavy, particularly if you've got a large area. So a custom-made foam insert is a great option. And if you do go to that newsletter that's in the archives on the website, you'll see there is a case study of a young woman who had a very, very large defect, almost circumferential, around the thigh. We had consent to use that for the newsletter, but unfortunately I didn't have the opportunity to gain consent to use it for this webinar. But when she put her pressure garment on, there was no pressure where she needed it. So the way we dealt with that is, well, my tip of the day is to take a snap block bag, a big snap block bag, cut it open so you've got double the size. So you've got a large piece of clear plastic, and then lay that over the defect, trace around the shape, make a judgment about the depth that you want, and bear in mind that you want the foam to be a little bit deeper than the actual defect itself, because the foam will compress a little bit, and we do want the compression to transfer through that foam to the tissue underneath. And then you can transfer that sort of plastic cutout outline to paper, or to, in this young woman's case, to 2 A4 pieces of paper, because it's spread across that, and then that can be emailed or faxed through with your order. Now, you can stitch a foam insert into the garment, but it's better done after fitting, so to make sure that it's really comfortable. And I would say that probably the majority of people that I've come across, they find it more comfortable if it is kind of free. It's not actually stitched into the garment, so that, say, for example, in this young woman's case, when she went to the toilet, she could pull the tights down, and it was not quite, she could just then slot the insert back in again when she pulled her pants back up. Now, sometimes you might choose to have custom-made foam padding, not with a defect, just because. And I actually saw a gentleman a couple of weeks ago who's had extensive revision of keloid scarring on his chest, quite extensive. So he needs to go into a vest. But for that same issue we were just talking about, with the challenge of that potential tenting across the décolletage, what I did was, again, traced with plastic around the shape, determine the foam depth, and then I'm going to get just a foam padding piece made that will sit under there, so it offsets the potential dip, but also it increases the amount of compression that is transferring through to that revised scar. And I've also requested that the surface that's in contact with the body is lined with Silontex. Now, you may or may not know about Silontex, but it is a 0.5 mil thick fabric, silicone fabric. And if, like me, you're thinking, oh, but why would you do that? Because that won't last. I was the same, but I stood corrected, because, in fact, Silontex almost invariably lasts the life of a garment. So it suddenly becomes a much, much cheaper option than gel sheets or a whole lot of other forms that you can use silicone. And you can be sure that you've got it exactly where you want, because you're placing that foam padding where you want it. Okay, that brings us to the end of the specific applications. Just very quickly, if you need to do any of these, adopt any of these solutions, You just use the normal order form and the relevant measuring form. But in this instance, make sure you include traces if you're doing foam inserts or foam padding, and photos always help. When there are tricky areas of the body to fit, photos always help. It just gets emailed, as always, to customer.service@jobskin.com, and they can be contacted on that number that you see on the screen. We've got lots of resources. If you haven't checked out the treasure trove that is jobskin.com, please do, because there's measuring videos, all the forms, there's newsletters, there's articles, there's lit searches. They're all there, really aiming to ease your practice. And Veronica is based in New Zealand. I'm based in Australia. You can email us anytime, because obviously we're going to log on. You may be able to catch us on phone, and there's Veronica waving at you. I would, as always, commend the design team, who just love a good challenge, and you can reach them at designers@jobskin.com. We've got a minute for any questions. If anyone has anything that they would like to ask, then now's your chance. Well, potentially I've either baffled you or solved your dilemmas. So one of those two. If you do come up with questions, by all means email us. If you can't find Veronica's or my email address, you can go to customer.service@jobskin.com and those emails can be forwarded on. But we appreciate you joining us for this webinar in our short and sweet series. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Rosemary. That was great.
Pleasure, Hildegard.